Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart, a podcast where vulnerability meets resilience. I'm MommaFoxFire, and today we are talking about schizophrenia, what it actually looks like to live with it, to be hospitalized for it, to be written off because of it, and to come out the other side with something to say. Schizophrenia affects roughly 1% of the global population, and it's one of the most misunderstood and most stigmatized mental health conditions out there. That's about 24 million people worldwide. It typically shows up in early adulthood, late teens to mid-30s, and it does not discriminate. It cuts across income levels, education levels, backgrounds. It doesn't care who you are or what your plans were. Symptoms can include hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking, and what clinicians call negative symptoms, things like reduced emotional expression or difficulty initiating tasks. And most people don't know, but people with schizophrenia are actually significantly more likely to be the victims of violence than the perpetrators of it. That stat gets buried every single time because it doesn't make for a good headline. The stigma around this diagnosis is brutal. We're talking about people losing jobs, relationships, housing, their sense of self, not always because of the illness itself, but because of how the world treats them once that label gets attached. Families get scared, systems get overwhelmed, and the person at the center of it all is often just trying to figure out who they are on the other side of something that turned their whole life upside down. That's where today's guest comes in. Dale Walsh has been living with schizophrenia for over 50 years. He was removed from Dartmouth College in 1975 during a mental health crisis, hospitalized 9 times over 5 years, and given just about every reason a person could be given to believe their story was over. But he didn't buy it. He went on to graduate magna cum laude from Fairleigh Dickinson University, has been psychosis-free for 34 years, and now coaches families of people diagnosed with schizophrenia through his Live Love program. I want to be upfront with you about something before you give this one a listen. It's not a neat and tidy conversation. Dale is a complex person who is still very much on his own journey, and this interview reflects that. His mantra is that recovery is always an option. After talking with him, I believe he means every word of that. Here's my conversation with Dale. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Mental Health Monday here on Even Tacos Fall Apart. I am very excited for today's conversation. We're going to be talking about schizophrenia and stigma, that's something that I really always want to talk about on this show and always want to kind of dig into. So the stigma around schizophrenia specifically, but then also just mental health in general. But my guest today is Dale Walsh. He has been living with schizophrenia for 50 years, and he is here to really challenge what we know about it. Dale was removed from Dartmouth College in 1975 following a mental health crisis, hospitalized 9 times over 5 years, and given every reason to believe his story was over before it had even really gotten a chance to start. Instead, he graduated magna cum laude from Fairleigh Dickinson University, has been psychosis-free for 34 years, and now coaches families of people diagnosed with schizophrenia through his Live Love method. So his mantra is recovery is always an option. And Dale, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, MommaFoxFire.
So I have just posted some socials. If you're looking to connect with Dale, feel free to hop in there. He's got now 3 podcasts. He just started a new one. So there's 3 links for you down there for the 3 podcasts, and then also ways to connect, including Instagram, email, and a way to make an appointment as well. So Dale, you mentioned wanting to introduce yourself with a poem, and Bite Mark always loves to come in here and ask, what is your favorite poem? So go right ahead.
Okay, well, this is a poem I wrote in 2014. I have an archive of 6,000 poems, but this has always been I've always used this as my basic introduction. It goes like this. It's called Dale Reviewing What Actually Happened. Hi, I'm God was a joke I made after Killer Dartmouth toke of some primo Ivy League smoke, which apparently caused me to croak. Because in mental hospital I woke with Roomy Gabriel, the main bloke who did my delusions angelically stroke. Even while doctor claimed my brain broke the moment divine gag I spoke, testifying I was only bit quack which clinicians diagnosed a psychotic attack preventing me from getting sanity back until I came to Teaneck Hackensack to pursue resident therapy program track and deal with my evident lack of reason among psychiatric patient pack who never gave me any slack. Under interrogation, the Soying crack.
So you wrote that in 2014?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's definitely something that speaks to your experience, that it spoke that strongly that you were just like, I need to make this rhyme. I need to write this down. I
Right.
need to express it.
Actually, Actually, this was one of the first of a new form that I came up, which I called a Dale, which is why it's called Dale Reviewing What Actually Happened. And mostly they're autobiographical, but it's a form of 6 words a line, 2 sets of 9 rhymes apiece. So basically, it's they can be very challenging to come up with 9 rhymes for the same concept. So but I probably have like at least 150 of those, and that's actually one of my favorite forms that I ever came up with. And so it's also a lot easier to memorize just because you only have to remember 2 sets of basic rhymes.
Yeah. Well, and then also whenever they rhyme that well, it makes it a lot more memorable too. So what inspired you to start sharing your story?
Well, Uh, just to summarize the poem and give as we used to say in group therapy, a nutshell. I was at Dartmouth. I went to Phillips Exeter Academy, which was the best boarding school in America. Ended up at Dartmouth College in 1974, in September 74, and promptly joined forces with my best friend and roommate from Exeter, Hugh, who at Dartmouth, who had a year before me because I went to school in England after I didn't get into any college that I wanted to out of Exeter. So Hugh had a year at Dartmouth to lay down the field for my arrival. So this field led to a immediate immersion into absolute party animal, Dartmouth College Animal House training. And actually, Animal House was based upon Dartmouth. It was written by alumni of Dartmouth who basically wrote Animal House about the time I was at Dartmouth. And I was one of the biggest party animals at Dartmouth, but I was also one of the most academically successful just because my secondary education was so good. So anyway, I had a very successful freshman year, totally immersed in a top-notch Ivy League marijuana every day, and then plus like hallucinogenics basically every weekend. So
Hmm.
uh, and this went on for basically 11 months until and at the end of July 1975, I came up with what I thought was like the most hilarious joke of my life, which was, "Hi, I'm God." And then, so anyway, I was like walking around campus telling everybody my joke and then seeing how long it was before I burst into hysterical laughter because how could the creator of the universe be 5'8"? That was like the whole punchline. But so anyway, I was walking around Dartmouth for about 2 days telling my joke, and people were looking at me weirder and weirder. So I figured it was time to get off campus and cool things down. So even though I didn't drive a stick, I went to my best friend Steve's room to see if I could borrow his VW Beetle to go visit my friend Basie at Middlebury College just to let Dartmouth cool its jets for a while because um, it was, Dartmouth that summer was exploding. It wasn't just partying. It was like, it was like a whole new paradigm mindset,
Hmm.
and actually the paradigm mindset was blamed on me to my mother by the dean.
Oh,
So
wow.
so, and which is absurd, I mean, I was just I wasn't doing anything that I hadn't done for the last 11 months, but everybody else was just starting to party like me. So anyway, long story short, I went to Steve's room and I'm lighting a bowl of hash, and the campus cops come in and say, "Are you Dale?" I said, "Yes." Said, "Would you come with us?" Said, "Sure." So I put the half pipe in my pocket and went out to the station wagon, expecting them to take me to meet the president of the university. But instead, they took me to the infirmary, where for the next 4 hours I was interrogated by 3 sets of Ivy League psychiatrists who diagnosed me as nonstop talker because they were asking me questions. That's why I was asking. That's why I was talking. And then so at one point, about like an hour before the end, I said, "This is bullshit. I'm leaving." So I went out and I was at the top in a room at the top of the stairs to the exit to the infirmary, and some nurse's aide or something grabbed me by the arm and said, you aren't going anywhere." So I just like looked down at his hand and I said, "Okay, well, if they're going to resort to violence, I'm not going to argue." So instead, I went back, finished talking with the psychiatrist. They took me to a room, gave me a shot, which I don't know what it was, and that's where my whole life changed. And 2 days later, I was in the best mental hospital in New York City with a roommate named Gabriel, who was very deferential towards my mother, Mary Alma, whose first husband was Roger and whose second husband was Jody Joseph, and ultimately married the judge, the Iran Contra Independent Council.
So you went through all of this, and it's quite a lot that you've been through. What made you decide, I need to start telling this story? I need to start sharing it, going on podcasts and that kind of thing.
Because I got tired of being forced to share everything with my medicine mucks. Because when I got taken away from Dartmouth, my 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 vision of God was threefold. One, God needs a vacation, so I'll take his place until he's ready to come back. Secondly, God just wants to be one of the guys to put to rest this whole God debate about whether God existed, to be the living incarnation of God, so nobody could argue the existence of, everybody could argue about whether God existed, but nobody could argue about whether Dale existed. So basically, that was like my Trinity thinking when they took me away. Yeah, basically, I ended up at a psychiatric program in Hackensack under the care of a doctor who who had been going to medical school in 1942 and studying to be a brain surgeon, and whose brain surgery professor was Mussolini's personal physician. So basically, I'm 2 jumps away from Mussolini. And this was the doctor whose program I was in for 5 years, who put me in the hospital 9 times. And actually, Foxfire, I've been in the hospital before 1920, before 2006. I was in the hospital 15 times, 9 times when the doctor himself admitted me, and the last 6 times I amended myself because I knew I was psychotic. So, um, so basically, uh, I ended up in this program run by this expert in fascist mind manipulation, and that's why I went to the hospital 9 times, because I might not have consciously known what he's doing, but I knew he was trying to transform me into someone who I was not, and he feared me because I saw through his fascist bullshit. You know, I also understood that as an American, well, as an American, I realized America and Russia had conquered Nazism in World War II. And basically, what I felt was I was doing, it was me versus, it was it was Dale versus Duck, or the Americans versus the fascists, to bring down the communists, which we did. The Berlin Wall came down in 1989. with Doc, and Doc and I continued to work together until his death in 1999. But you know, it really was it really was like a relationship refined in fire because ultimately um, he was Godfather of Muck and I was leader of the Ducks.
Hmm.
And Dale, uh, Dale set up my reality as a never-ending saga of Duck versus Muck. And I was the leader of the Ducks, and it was just a matter of finding out who the Mucks were and taking care of them.
Okay. So after these hospitalizations and everything you've been through, and now you're on your fourth identity, you've kind of described yourself as stepping into a new identity beyond diagnosis. What does that mean to you? And what was the turning point for you?
Well, in terms of schizophrenia, everybody thinks that schizophrenia is multiple personalities, and there are a lot of similarities. And this is actually something that I always used to argue with a doc about is whether I was a schizophrenic or a multiple personality,
Hmm.
because I knew I was a multiple. I have 5 basic personalities just from my natural growth: Dale, Dewey, Do, Duck, and Genius. And basically, Dale, Dewey, Do grew out of my I'm God declaration at Dartmouth. So I went to the program as Dale, and through my hospitalizations and everything, I was fractionalized into Do and Dewey. And that became the inner trinity that was that came to be in conflict with actuality. I say there's reality and then there's actuality. And reality for me is the inner trinity, and that's always what guides me and how I perceive and feel God. So this is something that I've been developing just in the last weeks. This theory, but now that I've reached ducks. So if you think of schizophrenia as multiple personalities, and say Dale was a schizophrenic, then he had 3 basic personalities. But as I said, there are 5 basic personalities. They're Dale, Dewey, Do, Duck, and Genius. So those are the 5 basic Earth personalities I have, and what I call my Dialina body, which is Dale's spaceship, and I wrote a whole trilogy about that. Anyway, so um, what has happened, having reached the fourth identity, as I said, is that, and what follows recovery is not only have I unified the fractured trinity within myself, but I've also raised it to the next level of consciousness, so that instead of Dale, Dewey, Do, with which many interpret wrongly as a masculine trinity. Actually, Dewey is the masculine, and Dale, female Dale, is the feminine. And then Dew is the Lord. It's not Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. It's two masculine and containing a feminine, an anima. It's like two masculine, divine masculines containing a divine feminine. So the feminine can just like keep expanding, which is the feminine principle, and the masculine principle can contain as she expands. So basically, the inner Trinity for me was not the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. The Holy Basic Earth Trinity is Dale, Dewey, Do, and Dale is the female, Dewey is the male, and Do is the Lord. So every trinity in my reality is based upon this balance between the Christ and Sophia and God. Wisdom, which is mentioned in Proverbs. Proverbs is a book about wisdom, and I've been watching a lot of stuff about how wisdom in Sophia has been absolutely suppressed by the masculine patriarchy because the pure feminine anima cannot be controlled by a imbalanced masculine. And an imbalanced masculine, which is what the patriarchy has become, is cannot absorb the power of the unleashed feminine anima. Therefore, what I say about what follows recovery, what I call recovery, is the absolute integration of my first trinity, Dale, Dewey, Do, into a coherent whole. And having done that in the last week, actually the last 2 weeks, I've now arrived at my fourth identity, which is Duck. And Duck has there's a new trinity in town. It's Duck, Ducky, and Chucky. And Chucky was Dewey. It's actually Dewey, Ducky, and Chucky. Dewey, God bless his soul, was Dewey's best buddy, and he fell in the war in Dewey Wars. So God bless, but he's actually now the controlling guardian spirit of the of duckdom. Muck has been eliminated, Foxfire. There is no more Muck. That's Fred is dead. Fred was my uh, eternal opponent who I met finally at Fairleigh Dickinson. He was the warlord. He was born in 1947, and he inherited the mantle of violence of World War II and basically continued the violence. So he's gone. Uh, he's officially out of the picture. So now that Fred is dead, the true duck possibilities of eternal life have become manifest. Because in a duck world, there is no Fred. And therefore, everything is duck wars, instead, not duck versus muck, which is inner battle between the ducks, but it's duck wars. So we have 3, 2, 1 battle on Earth. Huey versus Donald. Huey Duck versus Donald Duck. Huey, the legislative, versus Donald, the White House. And in the middle is Dewey, who's the judicial. And
So,
that's the new trinity of the new Duck trinity is Dewey, Ducky, and Chucky.
so understanding that this identity is new for you and everything, what does your daily life look like now? You live on your own. We were actually joking before this that you have quite the bachelor pad and everything. So, what does life on a daily basis look like for you, and what keeps you there?
Well, the biggest change that I made in myself in the last 6 months is I've totally switched from day-to-day living to Dale-to-Dale living. So in Dale-to-Dale living, the motto of Dale-to-Dale living is simultaneous. This is like a quantum equation. Will lead to insanity without spontaneity. So basically, that's what happened with Dale at Dartmouth. Simultaneity, he realized simultaneity, and basically he couldn't. It was too much to process. So I said I was God, and he got taken away, and basically turned himself over to the fate that was unknown, but is now apparent, was written for him before his birth.
So, you live, go ahead.
And I'm now at the point where I've fully run that program. I've fully run the Dale program. And therefore, finally, after 71 years, my life of biogenetic predestination is finished. And for the last 6 days, I've been able to experience true free will.
What's the biggest difference for you in the last 6 days?
Instead of worrying about what's going to happen in the future or thinking about what's the past, I'm totally focused on the Dale moment and and building a continuity between those moments, between the moments that destroy each other and the moments that are created in a moment, and and how you manipulate that present to build a better future.
You've been living with this diagnosis for 50 years. How has the stigma around schizophrenia changed since this started for you?
Well, this is actually a big point of a lot of my podcast talks. But yeah. So when I was in the program, I'd like totally isolate. One of the reasons I would go to the hospital is because I would just feel so claustrophobic within the program that I had to get out. I'm constantly, even when I was quote psychotic, judged psychotic. The reason I was judged psychotic is because I was just growing at a rate that people couldn't keep up with.
Mm.
Uh, and that's actually one of the reasons I fractured into three, is to be able, through the Lord, to control the manic, what most people perceive as the manic of Dale, the mania of Dale. It's well, the doctor's official diagnosis for me for the first 7 years till I applied for disability and realized and found out I was officially a paranoid schizophrenic schizoaffective. His diagnosis for me was psychotic bliss. And
Mm.
basically, that no one else, I don't think, has ever gotten that diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And this is this is just like another one of the diagnoses that I've gotten that they had to come up with. When I was in the hospital, the first hospital before Hackensack, uh, my doctor Cohen, his name is Cohen, so I called him Cohen. He he said I was suffering from infantile omnipotence complex. So that means that, the idea behind that one is a baby gets all its needs answered by crying. So it thinks that the louder it cries, the more power it has, and that leads to like this omnipotence delusion. So basically, I was told I had an infantile omnipotence complex, and looking back, I agree because I was Dale being reborn into a future of beyond anything I'd ever known.
At what age does schizophrenia typically appear? And do you have warning signs before a full psychotic episode?
Well, that's a very interesting question. This is like, but before we move on to that, I didn't answer about stigma. So basically, stigma for the first when I was in the program was basically being in psychiatric quarantine.
Mhm.
Basically, I had like a few friends who we had a street gang called the Daggers of Hackensack, and and I was sort of like a spiritual leader to them, but basically I was in psychiatric quarantine for the whole time I was in the program. Then I got out and got my own apartment and went back to Fairleigh Dickinson, and it took me basically 2 years to relearn how to socialize with normal college students just because I had just been like such a different, totally different paradigm in the program than what I was when I was back in college and basically normal again. But I became a cult figure. I became more than a cult figure. I graduated in 1985, and for the next 10 years, I became the spirit of the campus and student body's best friend. And I not only hung out on campus every day, but I also had a very profitable, successful business writing papers for Fairleigh Dickinson students. So basically, for in 10 semesters, I wrote 300 papers for Fairleigh Dickinson students.
Wow.
And people say that's unethical and even illegal. And I say, was it's ethically in the shadow, but it also supported me for 5 years.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
but there, an answer to stigma instead of like, because if you have schizophrenia, you have to like be honest with yourself and say, how are other people going to perceive me?
Yeah.
If I hide this, then they're going to think I'm weird. So my philosophy was always, "Hi, I'm Dale. I'm a schizophrenic." And the idea was, if you want to run away, you're scared. Good. do. That's your decision, and I respect it. I'm not going to say anything, but if you want to take the time to get to know me, I'm a very fun person, and that's why I say like just bear in mind you're never alone with the schizophrenic.
I mean, I really like the approach of saying, like, hi, this is me, and this is all of me. This is the part that I feel like is going to be the scariest to you. And if you want to run away, that's fine. I think that takes a lot of courage to do. It also makes you pretty vulnerable. I mean, did you have some bad reactions to that?
Well, you can't care.
Yeah.
I know people would always like snicker or like make comments as soon as I leave a room. It doesn't matter because it wasn't part of my reality. My reality is what I perceive, what my body perceives. That is all what reality is. And anybody who thinks that they know what the hell is going on is believing, which has lie at the middle. If you believe, you're living a lie. You either know or you're asking. That's it. So basically, if you believe that something's happening, then you're believing illusions of screens. And what you have to focus on is total reality, which is what I see, what this avatar perceives is all that is real on the earth. And basically, you're a walking observation portal for your soul to see the world. And the world you perceive is the world you're creating spontaneously and projecting into reality. So what I've done is rather than deal with everything being a delusion or an illusion, basically temporary and ephemeral, I built Teaneck Hackensack City into the holy city over 50 years by my presence because I know Teaneck Hackensack's community is real because I built it into the kingdom into the temple of the of duck, and that's why I say now I've reached my fourth identity because the whole purpose of Dale, the whole inner purpose of Dale, since being taken away from Dartmouth was to reach the fourth identity and to build the temple for Duck, the temple on earth for Duck, because no, I mean, the Bible, they're always like saying we got to build a temple for God. Well, Dale declared himself God and built his own temple, his own holiest city, in Teaneck Hackensack community. And now THC has progressed to Teaneck Hackensack Cosmos, and that's another big jump that's going on with Earth. Humanity is that Dale, Dewey, Do, the fundamental primordial trinity is now transformed into into the couple Dewey Ducky under Chucky, and therefore everything that is old Earth, or everything that is old Earth is what I call Fred Deck. And uh, we have completed the transition, and everybody's talking about the cycle that's going on. I got the inside scoop on the Foxfire. It's a 64,000 year Fred Dale cycle, and Fred was the warlord, and basically from the beginning of Earth consciousness, uh, to today, 64,000 years is how the Earth was formed between the battle between Fred, who represents physicality, and Dale and Rosedale, who's my Sophia. Rose is my Sophia, and Dew is my essence. So basically, I'm getting a point. Rosedale was completely spiritual, and what happened infinitely, infinities ago is that it came up against the physicality in Fred, and Fred was the demiurge or the material essence, and Rosedale was destroyed by it because we had like absolutely no idea it existed. We were existing in a spiritual eternal harmony, and so Fred hit the scene and broke up, and basically Fred Rosedale, and ever since then it's been a battle of 64,000 years between me and Fred for control of the soul of Rose. And of course, she was never going to fall for him, but she is now rescued because Fred is dead.
So, has there been a change in the stigma since you got this diagnosis?
Well, now people just say they it- they don't even ask me to explain anymore. But that's the beautiful thing is that having the force identity is duck, which is involved is in naturally leads to the fifth and sixth identity of Genius and Roger, who uh the new duck couple is that is a new trinity. Dewey, Ducky, Chucky replaces Dale, Dewey, Do.
Mhm.
And that's the cycle that's ending. The Fred Dale cycle from which Earth rose primordial muck, primordial muck is now complete. And Fred was the incarnation of that muck. And it took 64,000 years of Earth's evolution for both of us to manifest in perceivable human form. And now he's been removed from Earth. So that's that's so Fred is dead, Muck is gone, and people say, well, there's still violence. This is just cleanup. The the next step is to bring Chuck artillery against Red M16 in Iran and eliminate the regime.
So, you mentioned earlier that you've written 6,000 poems or something like that. Do you write
Yeah.
other things? Do you write books?
Well, actually, it's interesting you should ask that because my literary career is divided into two distinct periods. The period before I graduated from Fairleigh Dickinson, when as Roger Allen Walsh pseudonym, I wrote the epic trilogy of Velvet Velour's Follies before I graduated, and that's a trilogy. But I wrote six novels. They are novels. They're actually a future. I call them future histories, which are now manifesting. But so I wrote six novels before I graduated, and when I graduated, I turned to poetry, and now I have an archive of 6,000 poems. So it's all archives waiting to be published when Earth is ready.
Okay. So, getting back to the stigma of everything, of schizophrenia specifically, whenever you started kind of introducing yourself as, "Hi, I'm Dale, I have schizophrenia," do you feel like that stigma has changed over time, or has it stayed the
I
same? You've
I
changed.
I don't think of myself as schizophrenic anymore. I am
Hmm,
having reached my fourth identity. When I want to say MommaFoxFire is, um, the whole thing. People say, "Come on, Dale, you're changing your name again," and that's basically what I did when I was in Dale Dewey. But that story is now complete. Therefore, now I stigmatize doctors and therapists. I'm the one who's stigmatizing because I don't believe anybody has a right to try to tell anybody else who to be. I think all psychosis is a lack of patience on the part of everybody around.
okay.
Just like a refusal to accept the reality that someone else is so different from you
Yeah.
and so different from what everybody else expects you to be.
Yeah. Or have there been, you mentioned you've had psychotic episodes in the past, and now you view those differently, that people just kind of need that patience to understand what someone's going through. Are there warning signs before you reach that point?
Well, as I said, the last six times I was hospitalized, I put myself in. So,
Yeah.
you know, having I mean I I don't want to be absolutely negative about Dr. Bonanno, but about Doc, but because he was like he was like a found he was a foundation and a rock in my life at a
Mhm.
time when actually no one else, even though he was being paid good money to listen to me, no one else would, you know? So,
Yeah.
but as for psychotic episodes now, I know Dale was never psychotic. Dale, I mean, knowing the core of do, I know the core of do has never shifted from its place in my body. And the core might have transformed, which is what's happening now, and the change is complete from Dale Dewey Do to Dewey Ducky Chucky. That is complete now. Fred is dead. There is no more death. Dewey, I figured out actually, MommaFoxFire this morning in my morning walk. Dewey Death, who is the greatest terror ever thrust upon mankind, is not actually death, DEATH, Drug Enforcement Agent Tina Hackensack. It's depth, DEPTH. So, I was just like reflecting on Fred and thinking, no, but Fred's not really dead, but he is. And that's what I realized, that there is no depth, but there is dewy depth, which is an eternal sinking into the void.
You work now with families and caregivers and not necessarily with patients themselves. Why did you choose to focus on the caregivers and the family side of things in your work?
Nobody else does. I mean, that's really like one of the great crimes of the mental health system is their lack of inclusion of anybody in the psychiatric process. So basically, I am someone. I'm a, I, I- I'm an everyday. I wake up and I have less regard for, especially psychiatrists, but minor deities, MDs all over the place. But I mean, I think psychiatrists are just big fat readers who basically take advantage of people and keep them in victimhood, and they're paid their livelihood depends on keeping people in victimhood, and therefore they subconsciously encourage a victim mentality and a codependency on the doctors to keep the doctors being able to pay for their third house in Miami. And I think it's pretty absurd. And the whole mental, I mean, even my counselor, this has been like a week of transition for me. And to tell you the truth, the Mama Foxfire, after 51 years, I stopped taking my medication because medication is for Dale Dewey Do. It's not for Duck. And Duck, it's considered every scenario possible, stopping my medication, and I see no choice but to, for my own freedom, but to break away from from the doctor Planet Prolixin.
So you stopped taking your medication
Six
in the
days ago.
last 6 days. Gotcha. Gotcha.
And I'm talking to doctor tomorrow, and I'm talking to my counselor on Friday, and it's a case of a constant assessment at this point. But I'm feeling no withdrawal symptoms, and the one thing that always hit me about taking medication was in the past, whenever I said stop taking my medication, I'd be in the hospital within 2 days to 2 weeks. But I haven't had a serious hospitalization since 1993. And one of the things about hospitalizations is, and stopping medication, is that when I would stop medication, I would feel that I was reaching a new level of understanding whether it was a full identity or whether it's just like, insights and everything. And every time I almost got to the point where I was stale with that identity, I'd get shot full of drugs again, and I'd have to like go back to do and start all over again. So that's really something that's been on my mind about stopping medication. But then I say to myself, but the situation now is completely different. I'm in completely different minds. Is like, why should I hold on to this psychiatric past when Doc is dead 20?
Well, I'm glad to hear you're still talking to your doctors and everything. I think it's important anytime you change medications or stop taking medications or start taking medications. And I'm going through this with one of my kids right now. It's like you're going to start on a new medication. We need to make sure that you're monitoring what's happening and making sure
Right.
you're talking to your doctors and everything. So glad to hear your
To be honest, I've been like the biggest advocate of psychiatric medication for the last 25 years.
Mhm.
But you know, with this growth in the duck, it's like I'm reevaluating everything that comes to Dale's care.
Yeah, yeah, for yourself, for sure. So, how did you start working with families and caregivers? How did that come about?
Well, the first thing was I just had a download from God that basically I came up with it. I was gifted the idea of the Live Love program, which I feel is like a perfect therapeutic instrument for dealing with not just psychosis, but also just generally. And the Live Love is an anagram. It stands for the 8 steps of the program. So basically, I created a 3 month, 9 step program based upon Live Love. And Live Love is an anagram for learn the 8 progressive steps. Learn, integrate, validate, explore, and then listen, open, value, and express. And the whole idea is to, within, within 8 hours, to transform the mindset of the client completely that no matter how stressed they are more independent. They are no longer codependent with their with their affected one, loved one. But in answer to the foundation of your question, I just realized after the Live Love came to me, I was thinking about how could I use it and everything, and it just hit me. What about the families? Because I realized how much pain and anger and angst I'd caused my own family through my own recovery, and they'd always support. They always
Yeah.
yeah, and that was like the greatest blessing in my life. So, uh, but it just hit me, I mean, with HIPAA and especially with HIPAA, I mean, if your child is hospitalized and they're 18 and they say you get, no to letting you have information, even they can't even tell you if your son or daughter is being discharged from the hospital. And that's
Mhm.
totally absurd. And as for actual psychiatric practice, excluding HIPAA, well, it's at the discretion of the patient. But a lot of times, how competent is a patient to make such a decision, especially with something like serious mental illness or paranoia, where you think your mother is like the mother of demons, and you're the only chosen child among all your siblings that is going to be blessed when Jesus comes back. I mean, that's an example of a delusion. And, the most difficult thing in the world, I don't care what you say, whether it's running a marathon or whatever, the most difficult thing in a human life to overcome is delusion. And it took
Hmm.
me 51 years to truly overcome my God delusion. And now that I have, uh, basically, I had a revelation about a year ago when I was giving a presentation about my history. I was just telling my God story, and I'm God's story, and it hit me that um, they were no longer true of me. So basically, it's just like in a moment, someone popped the water balloon of that had been building over my head for 51 years, and it just like flooded down and cleansed me of my God delusion. And I realized I'm Dale. And this whole God thing was a distraction from what I really should have been doing. And, people, so do I think the delusion was a waste of time? Absolutely not. I totally immersed myself into the concept of God and became him after I'd said I was. So basically, the fact is that that was a delusionary distraction to the real purpose of my life. And it was like a very valuable lesson. My schizophrenia was a very valuable lesson for me to absorb and to go through and to spend 50 years understanding, coming to terms with myself. But now, with having reached the fourth identity of Duck, the Duck Genius Chuck Trinity has now been activated. So Dewey, Ducky, Chucky is the same as Duck, Genius, and Chucky. So however you want to call the couple in the Duck Trinity, it's the couple, Christ and Sophia, wisdom, with the Lord who's Chucky and not on Earth anymore.
You mentioned codependency between loved ones and family members. Can you explain what that looks like and why it's so common with schizophrenia?
Sure. Partly is a victim mindset that is encouraged by the psychiatric community that I mentioned, but also the fact it's so disempowering the way schizophrenia is treated. Because when I was in my first hospital, I asked my doctor, Dr. Cohen, I said, why am I in here? And he said, well, if you broke your leg, you'd come to the hospital, right, Dale? Said, sure. Said, well, you broke your brain. So that was like the most stigmatizing statement I've ever heard, and it traumatized me for 35 years because I mean, this is 1975, so it was still in the it was I mean, I think they're still in the dark ages, but it was still like deep in the dark age of psychiatric history. But this idea that once you have a diagnosis, you're crippled or damaged for life is just, I mean, that's why Live Love says recovery is always an option. But you got to work. I mean, recovery is
Mm-hmm.
not, you got to break out not only of your own stigma, but also the stigma that everybody is creating around you. But the self stigma is actually the hardest to overcome because it's just like that's what the court. I mean, delusion is based upon insecurity. So the core essence of schizophrenia is insecurity. So you create delusions to deal with your insecurities. And that's basically what I did. And the ultimate delusion, which is I'm God, but that's also the ultimate way to cover your insecurity. And therefore, once I said that, it got at my fighting duck spear. And you know, when I was hospitalized with Gabriel, thinking I was God, and then over time, through confirmation bias, whether it's true or not, the statement "I'm God" became more and more valid in my experience. That then the self stigma is is what ca- is what keeps you from understanding what your delusion really is. My delusion wasn't I'm God. My delusion was I'm not Dale. And that's the basis of any delusion, that you are something that you are not. And that's why it's so hard to get rid of, because very few people can actually see it that.
Yeah. If a family member suspects that their loved one is experiencing psychosis, especially for the first time, what's the first thing or the first couple of things they should do to help?
Uh, well, as I said, I hospitalized myself 6 times because I knew hospitalized myself before I went psychotic,
Hmm.
basically. So I got the help I needed when I needed it. If you're new, having a loved one come down with schizophrenia is absolute one of is being hit by a tsunami of unknowing.
Yeah.
That's like what one of the problems is. It's not only the inability of people to understand and to listen to their loved one, but also to refuse to see themselves in their loved one. And
Mm.
that's basically what I help people to learn to do, is to see through their love, see their true loved one rather than I split it into the difference between actuality and reality. And how I define that is what you see is real. What you no, what you see is real. What you look at is real. REEL. And we are in a world of screens of endless reels, and basically everybody's reality is defined by the screens that they see, whether it's the screens of external reality or inside or outside buildings. It's all a screen that you're walking through. It's all a video game that uh, that you're playing with the universe. And uh, what what happened in terms of schizophrenia and the forced identity is for the last 51 years I've been the um I've been the game player Dale manipulating the avatar uh Dewey to get to the next board of Dew. And I won the game. I reached the point where I've net the second screen, the fourth screen after the first three screens merged together is now in front of me. Dale spent 51 years studying God and in order to understand himself. And now, having reached the fourth identity, which is where you become the computer uh, that's running the game station, that's running the PlayStation, instead of being involved with the PlayStation, you're now the computer that's running the PlayStation. And then Genius is the programmer of the computer, and Chucky is the creator is of the computer. So that's what the new analogy is all about. So basically, we're moving from avatar screen to computer technology and Earth operating system.
So, was there anything whenever you were first diagnosed or first hospitalized that you wish any of your family members had done differently?
Well, actually, my mother had a history of psychiatric situations, so that's why I was so quickly hospitalized. Because actually, the day I got taken away from Dartmouth, my adopted father, the judge, was being inaugurated as president of the American Bar Association. So that's why I was in the infirmary for 3 days, because my parents had to come back from being inaugurated as president of the ABA to New York before I could like join them. So, but my mother, when the situation developed at Dartmouth, of course, the administration was in close touch with my parents. But I think one of the reasons well, so when I was hospitalized, I, with my high on God delusion, uh, basically, so I went. I left. They got two fraternity guys to drive me from Dartmouth down to my parents' apartment in New York. And I spent the night in my parents' apartment, and then the next morning early, we went to a very nice building, to a very nice office, and met Dr. Cohane. And we're talking. I'm not talking crazy or anything. I'm just like carrying on conversations. I'm not talking about being God, because I never revealed my delusion to my parents. So, but anyway, so Dr. Cohen puts the paper in front of me and says, could you sign this deal? And I look at my mother and she says, sign it. So I'm not going to argue. So I sign it. Uh, my parents get it, and everybody said, okay, fine. So everybody gets up. My parents go left. I go left and follow them. And Dr. Cohen says, no deal, you're coming with me. So took me up to a locked unit for the next 13 weeks. I mean, I would get past it. Basically, I was locked up for the next 13 weeks and getting intensive psychotherapy.
Wow. Yeah. So, was there anything that they could have done to help you a little bit better? Could they have been more clear with what was happening,
But
or?
looking back, they did everything they thought they should,
Sure.
and they did a hell of a lot more than like 98% of other people would have done. And to have the courage to put me in the hospital in the first place, you know, that took a lot of shit bust. So, and and personally, I just thought it was sort of like funny. It was like when they went left, my old world, the old world of Dale before psychiatry left too. So, I used to say I knew Dale 20 years before anybody else did. So my parents went left, and my world went that way, and um, doctor said come here. So it's like, okay. And my whole philosophy was based on ingestion of LSD, which is go with the flow. And so having initiated this God thing, it was like Dewey like came out and said, okay, prove me wrong. And in 51 years, no one ever proved me wrong. People used to say, well, if you're God, then walk across the water. I'd say, well, first off, I don't say I'm Jesus, and secondly, I've waited for the bridge to be built. So that's where we are today because we as when I said I'm God, and my parents' reaction, my father was like one of the most influential men in America. So when I got sick, it really was like a shaking the core of American judicial integrity, as shown by the fact that the judge was chosen to be the Iran Contra Independent Counsel and investigate George or Reagan and Bush. So I still think of being betrayed, but on the other hand, they were, you know, my mother, I mean, with infinite resources and everything, basically, they did everything they could. And,
Yeah.
with Dr. Winana, whether he was a fascist or not, he was the core father figure for me for like 22 years, basically because the judge deferred to him. So
Yeah.
basically, even though I knew he was a fascist dictator, a lackey, I had to deal with it. And so what I was saying is, I went with the flow to see where this I'm God thing would go, and after 51 years, it's led to Duck.
Yeah. Well, we've got a couple of questions left here, and these are the questions that we like to ask every guest. So, what is your favorite life hack? It could be anything, any tip or trick or method that you use that makes your life a little bit easier.
Dale to Dale. Actually, Dale to Dale is the old paradigm. Now it's duck to duck, and duck to duck is much more in presence than Dale to Dale. So basically, Dale to Dale was always in fight or flight, and one of the things I've been consciously cultivating for the last month is switching from Dale sympathetic nervous system to duck parasympathetic nervous system. So after 70 years of fight or flight, I'm now finally realigning my nervous system to rest and digest. The fact is that self presence and just focusing even for 30 seconds. I mean, this is why I call the Dale exercise, which is just sit or stand or lie down and say, I am Dale in the bachelor's pad in Teaneck, Hackensack City on March 8th or 9th, 2026 at this time, and I'm doing this, and this is my Dale. And that's all it takes, just like that basic grounding.
I like that. Well, if you could have a magic wand, which I happen to have one here, if you could have a magic wand and wave it to eliminate one common opinion or misconception surrounding mental health, what would it be?
All schizophrenics are violent.
Yeah.
This is statistics that I always use to quote is they proven it's 50% more likely that seriously mentally ill people will have violence perpetrated against them than they'll actually perpetrate violence. And actually, I mean, they're all the sensationalist stories, but ultimately, the only reason that people with serious mental illness get violent is because they're driven into such a case of insanity by the lack of care and concern of other people.
Yeah. Well, that is all the questions that I have today. So what I'm going to do is post your links for folks to connect with you one more time. And then if you have anything that you want to share that we didn't get to cover, I'm just going to give you the floor for a little bit. So take it away.
Well, thank you. This week I did Betamax week, which means that we're running through the 8 steps from Dale to the Dialina day by day. So basically, I had 9 personalities. The 9th is the Dialina, which is the overall spaceship of my body. But the 8 personalities that make up the Dialina are the subject of Betamax week. And each day, I'm going through every personality twice a day to explain them. And that's on the Daily Dues on YouTube at 10 to 5:30.
And there's a link to that in the chat right now. So feel free to click on that and go check it out. But thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Folks who are here with us live, stick around. I will be right back, but let me disconnect with Dale offline. And Dale, again, thank you for taking the time out.
Well, I hope this has a live impact, MommaFoxFire, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to really explain the shift from 3D to force identity.
Absolutely. All right, folks, give me just a second. I will be right back. Thanks for listening to that conversation. This one really sat with me a little bit differently than some of our other episodes. Dale is not an easy person to put into a box, and I think that's kind of the point. He's been living with his diagnosis for over 50 years, and he's built a life, a real one, on his own terms. That doesn't mean everything about his story is clean or straightforward, because it's definitely not. But there's something in what he said that I keep coming back to. He talked about stigma as something that comes from 2 directions. There's the stigma that the world puts on you, the assumptions, the fear, the labels that follow you around. And then there's the self-stigma, the one you internalize, the voice that tells you the diagnosis is the ceiling and not just the floor you're standing on right now. He said the self-stigma is actually the harder one to beat. I think a lot of us know what he's talking about, even if we've never been anywhere near a psychiatric hospital. Most of us are carrying some version of a story we were handed about ourselves that we didn't ask for. Maybe it came from a diagnosis, or a relationship, or a family, or a moment that went sideways in a way that we never really fully recovered from. Dale's version of that was unusually dramatic, but the core of it isn't that far from what a lot of people deal with quietly every day. What stuck with me most was his approach to disclosure. He talked about walking up to people and just saying it straight. Hi, I'm Dale. I have schizophrenia. If you want to run, run. If you want to stay, I'm actually pretty fun. There's something kind of badass about that. No apology, no performance, just here's who I am, do with that what you will. I think a lot of us could stand to borrow a little of that energy. If today's episode resonated with you, the best thing you can do is share it. Send it to someone who needs it. Leave me a review or a comment on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Reviews and comments and interaction, liking the show, all of that genuinely helps us reach more people. And more reach means more conversations like this one getting out into the world, and that's what really matters. It's why we're here. As we wrap up, keep in mind that life doesn't always look neat or tidy. Some days it's frustrating and unfair. But even when you feel like you're falling apart, you are still worthy of care, compassion, and rest. Even tacos fall apart, and we still love them.